The first time I realized something was wrong at Waverly Hills Sanatorium wasn't when I heard footsteps on the 5th floor after lockdown. It was when an empty patient call light activated in a room that no longer had electricity connected to it. You're listening to True Haunting Log, where we share real haunted incidents from real people around the globe, and if you've experienced something you can't explain, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. Story 1. The Night Shift at Waverly Hills. I worked overnight security at Waverly Hills during the period when the building was already operating as a historical attraction and paranormal tour location, mostly locking sections after ghost tours ended, checking motion alarms, escorting the occasional cleanup crew, and making sure nobody wandered into dangerous areas of the old structure after hours. Honestly, after a few months there, you stop taking most paranormal stories seriously because every night tourists arrive already expecting to hear ghosts. They react to settling pipes, wind in hallways, distant echoes, normal building noises. Half the overnight ghost hunters would scare themselves into believing anything. And at first I treated Waverly the same way. Old abandoned building, emotional history, long corridors playing tricks on people psychologically. But the strange thing about Waverly Hills is that the building changes completely once everyone leaves. During tours, the place feels noisy, commercial, almost theatrical sometimes. People talking, cameras flashing, radios moving constantly between floors. But after lockdown, when the elevators stop, lights shut down, and the last group leaves the parking lot, the hospital becomes something else entirely. The silence inside that building after 2 feels unnatural, not empty, pressurized, like the structure itself is listening. Most overnight guards worked in pairs originally, but staffing problems eventually left me handling certain shifts alone. My route stayed mostly the same every night. Start on the lower floors, checking access doors, move through the old patient wings, monitor the tunnel entrances, finish near the 5th floor before returning downstairs around sunrise. Routine work, predictable, at least initially. The first unusual incident happened during a rainstorm in late October. Tours had ended early because weather knocked out partial power to sections of the building, so by midnight, I was alone upstairs checking corridors with only emergency lighting active in some wings. The old patient hallways looked endless in darkness there, long stretches of peeling walls and empty doorways fading into blackness, while rain hammered against broken windows further down the building. I remember walking through the 4th floor west wing when my radio suddenly crackled through static. At first I thought another staff member was trying to contact me from downstairs, but instead, I heard something else buried beneath the interference. Coughing. Weak, repetitive, like someone struggling to breathe. The sound lasted maybe 3 seconds before the radio returned to silence. I stood there listening carefully because abandoned hospitals produce strange acoustics sometimes, and honestly my first thought was another trespasser had somehow entered the building. That happened occasionally with urban explorers trying to sneak inside after tours closed. Security to all floors, I said into the radio automatically. Anyone upstairs? No response came back. Then, somewhere further down the dark hallway ahead of me, a call light activated. A soft mechanical click echoed through the corridor, followed by a weak amber light illuminating above one of the patient room doors near the far end of the wing. I stopped walking immediately because that section of rooms had no active electrical connection anymore. We used portable lighting during tours specifically because power to the old patient wings had been disconnected years earlier. Yet the call light continued glowing steadily in the darkness ahead. Then the radio crackled softly again. And through the static, a woman's voice whispered quietly enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Room 502 needs assistance. The moment the voice on the radio mentioned room 502, a cold pressure moved through my chest because every employee working Waverly eventually hears stories about that room whether they want to or not. Tour guides talked about it constantly. Paranormal groups obsessed over it. and honestly, most staff treated it like exaggerated folklore used to entertain overnight visitors. But standing alone in the fourth-floor hallway, listening to a dead call light glowing somewhere ahead of me in total darkness, made those stories suddenly feel much less entertaining. I grabbed the radio again, thinking maybe another employee was screwing with me through a hidden channel, but the speaker only hissed softly through static. No active transmission, no caller ID, nothing. Then the coughing returned. This time it didn't come through the radio. It came from somewhere deeper in the hallway ahead. Weak, wet, coughing, echoing faintly through the empty patient wing like someone struggling to breathe alone in the dark. My flashlight beam shook slightly while I moved forward because, despite everything strange about the situation, part of my brain still kept searching for a rational explanation. Maybe another guard upstairs. Maybe homeless trespassers. Maybe pipes echoing through the building strangely during the storm. But the deeper I walked into the corridor, the more wrong the atmosphere felt. The hallway temperature dropped noticeably colder than the rest of the floor. Not outside air, cold. Hospital cold, damp recycled air carrying faint chemical smells buried beneath dust and mildew. Then another sound joined the coughing. Wheels. Slow rolling movement somewhere nearby. Not loud enough to echo clearly, but unmistakable once I heard it. Metal wheels crossing old tile flooring at a measured pace. My pulse tightened immediately because Waverly still kept a few old wheelchairs stored downstairs for historical displays during tours. None were supposed to be anywhere near the upper floors. The call light ahead continued glowing softly above the doorway while the rolling sound moved somewhere beyond the intersecting hallway near the end of the wing. Then suddenly the coughing stopped completely. Silence settled over the corridor for several seconds before the radio crackled again beside my shoulder. "Security respond immediately," the woman's voice whispered through static. "Patient condition declining." The wording hit me harder than the voice itself because it sounded procedural, calm, professional, like an actual hospital transmission instead of someone trying to scare me. Then the wheel sound stopped abruptly, just beyond the intersection ahead. I rounded the corner quickly with the flashlight raised, expecting to finally catch another person moving through the building, but the connecting hallway stood empty. No wheelchair, no staff. Nothing except long stretches of abandoned patient rooms disappearing into darkness. And at the far end of the hall, another call light activated. Then another. Soft mechanical clicks echoed through the floor while weak amber lights illuminated one by one above empty room doors deeper inside the wing, room after room slowly activating in sequence down the corridor, like unseen patients were calling for nurses simultaneously. My breathing tightened painfully because those systems shouldn't have worked. Half the wiring upstairs had been disconnected decades earlier. Then movement appeared near the end of the hallway. Someone crossing between rooms. Fast enough that I only caught part of the figure in the flashlight beam. White clothing, thin posture, head lowered while pushing something on wheels through the darkness. "Hey," I shouted instinctively. The figure disappeared immediately behind one of the room entrances. I moved toward it quickly despite every instinct warning me not to, because now adrenaline had mostly replaced fear. I just wanted something concrete, something explainable. But when I reached the room doorway and swept the flashlight inside, the room stood completely empty. No furniture, no equipment, no person. Just dust-covered floors and peeling walls beneath weak emergency lighting. Then, from directly behind me in the hallway, a man's voice spoke calmly enough to stop my heart for a second. "You're late for rounds." The moment the man behind me said I was late for rounds, every muscle in my body locked because the voice sounded close enough that someone should have been standing directly beside me in the hallway. Calm, professional, slightly tired. Like a doctor speaking during a long overnight shift. I turned immediately with the flashlight raised, but the corridor behind me remained empty except for dim emergency lights and rows of abandoned patient rooms stretching into darkness. The amber call lights above the doors still glowed softly, one after another down the wing, while the old hospital around me hummed faintly with sounds that shouldn't have existed anymore. Then the wheel sounds returned. Closer this time. Metal wheels rolling slowly across tiles somewhere behind the intersecting corridor near the nurses' station ahead. I moved cautiously toward the sound because part of me still desperately needed a rational explanation. But the deeper I entered the floor, the more the hospital stopped feeling abandoned. The air itself felt occupied somehow, heavy, humid, thick with faint chemical smells and old dust disturbed by movement that should not have been happening. Then another noise drifted through the hallway. Voices. Low conversation somewhere beyond visibility. Not whispers, actual conversation. Muted enough that I couldn't understand the words clearly, but distinct human voices overlapping softly from further down the patient wing. My pulse tightened immediately because the sound resembled a functioning hospital at night. Staff speaking quietly while patients slept nearby. Routine nighttime activity. But Waverly Hills had been empty for decades. The wheel sound stopped near the nurse's station ahead, followed by a metallic clink-like equipment being adjusted. Then the overhead intercom crackled suddenly through the ceiling speakers. Static flooded the corridor for several seconds before a woman's voice spoke calmly through the system. Night staff report to 5th floor isolation. The announcement echoed through the abandoned wing while every call light along the corridor flickered once in unison. My flashlight trembled slightly because there was no active intercom system upstairs anymore. Most of the wiring had been disconnected years ago. We used portable radios during tours specifically because the original hospital systems no longer functioned. Then the voices further down the hall abruptly stopped talking all at once. Complete silence settled across the floor. A cold pressure crawled slowly through my chest because suddenly it felt like the building had noticed me listening. Then from the nurse's station ahead, a woman stepped partially into view beneath weak emergency lighting. White uniform, dark hair pinned back, thin, exhausted posture. She looked completely solid, not transparent, not distorted, just a tired hospital worker standing quietly at the station looking down at papers in her hands. For several seconds, I genuinely thought another tour actor or employee had somehow wandered upstairs without permission, because nothing about her appearance looked exaggeratedly supernatural. Then she slowly looked up toward me, and my blood went cold. Her eyes never focused correctly. They moved across me like she was trying to recognize someone she expected to see there instead. "You're behind schedule," she said softly. The exact same phrase hospital staff had apparently repeated throughout the building all night. "Who are you?" I asked immediately. The woman glanced briefly down the dark hallway behind me. "Too many patients tonight," she whispered. "Not enough staff left." Then somewhere far above us on the 5th floor, a patient call bell began ringing continuously through the building. Loud, repetitive, desperate. The woman at the nurse's station immediately turned toward the stairwell as if responding automatically to routine procedure. Before disappearing into the darkness leading upstairs, she looked back at me one final time and quietly said something that stayed with me long after leaving Waverly Hills. "You need to start answering the calls." The moment the woman disappeared toward the 5th floor stairwell telling me I needed to start answering the calls, something changed psychologically inside me, because up until then, I had still been reacting to the building like an intruder. But somewhere during those endless hallways and repeating announcements, the hospital had started making me feel responsible for what was happening around me. The patient bell above echoed continuously through Waverly Hills, while weak emergency lighting flickered against peeling walls around the nurse's station. I remember standing there trying to convince myself to go downstairs immediately, radio for backup, leave the floor entirely. But the ringing overhead kept triggering the same instinct over and over in my head. Someone needed assistance. And before I fully realized what I was doing, I was already moving toward the stairwell leading to the 5th floor. The bell stopped ringing the moment I reached the landing upstairs. Silence swallowed the corridor immediately afterward. The 5th floor at Waverly always felt different from the rest of the building, even during daytime tours. Longer hallways, narrower patient wings, lower ceilings pressing down psychologically, while cold air moved through broken windows at the far ends of the corridor. Most employees avoided staying there alone after dark longer than necessary because the atmosphere upstairs felt emotionally wrong in ways difficult to explain logically. My flashlight beam moved slowly across empty room entrances while I walked deeper into the isolation wing, searching for whoever triggered the call bell. No voices now, no movement, just distant rain against shattered windows somewhere beyond the darkness. Then I noticed something impossible near the middle of the hallway. A medical chart hanging outside one of the patient rooms. Fresh paper clipped neatly inside it. I stopped immediately because the hospital props used during tours were always stored downstairs after closing. Nothing should have been left upstairs overnight. Yet when I stepped closer and raised the flashlight toward the chart, I saw handwritten notes covering the page in faded ink. Patient temperatures, medication times, respiratory distress observations. The dates were from the 1940s. Then, beneath all the older entries, one line had been written in darker, fresher-looking ink. Night staff delayed responding. A cold wave moved through my chest instantly because the handwriting looked recent. Then from somewhere behind the patient room door beside me, someone inhaled sharply. I froze completely. Not ghostly breathing, human breathing. Weak, painful inhalation followed by wet coughing somewhere inside the dark room. My hand reached for the door automatically before my thoughts fully caught up because by that point the building had slowly conditioned me into reacting like hospital staff instead of security. "Hello?" I called softly while pushing the door inward. The room beyond sat empty beneath darkness. No bed, no furniture, no patient. Just moonlight spilling faintly across cracked tile flooring through broken windows further inside. But the smell hit me immediately. Antiseptic. Old sickness. Damp cloth and stale medicine lingering in air that should have smelled only like dust. Then behind me in the hallway, wheels rolled slowly past the doorway. I turned instantly and caught sight of a gurney crossing the corridor outside, pushed by two figures in pale uniforms moving deeper into the 5th floor darkness. Their movements looked exhausted rather than threatening. Routine, mechanical, like people continuing work long after forgetting why they started. One of them glanced briefly toward me while passing. "Room 502 first," she whispered quietly. Then they disappeared around the far corner of the hall, without sound. My pulse hammered painfully because I realized something horrifying then. None of the entities inside Waverly acted like ghosts trying to scare people. They acted like hospital staff still trying to finish their shift. Then the overhead intercom crackled alive again above me. "Security," the woman's voice whispered softly through static. "Why haven't you checked the patient yet?" The moment the intercom asked why I hadn't checked the patient yet, I realized the building no longer saw me as security. Somewhere during that shift, Waverly Hills had started treating me like part of the hospital staff. The overhead speakers hissed softly through static while cold air moved down the 5th floor corridor around me. I remember standing there beside the empty patient room, gripping the flashlight so tightly my wrist hurt because deep down I understood something terrifying now. The voices weren't random hauntings. The building itself was repeating routines. The gurney wheels I heard earlier continued faintly somewhere deeper in the isolation wing while weak emergency lights flickered overhead one after another down the corridor. Then another patient call bell activated nearby. Room 502. A soft amber light glowed above the doorway at the far end of the hall. Every instinct told me to leave immediately. Go downstairs, get outside, never come back into the building alone again. But instead I found myself walking slowly toward the room because by that point the hospital had already conditioned my thinking. Every call felt unfinished. Every hallway felt like part of a shift that still needed completing. The closer I got to room 502, the colder the air became. Not supernatural cold, clinical cold, like stepping into a section of hospital still operating somewhere beneath the abandoned structure around it. The patient call light above the door continued glowing softly, while weak coughing drifted from somewhere inside the room. Human coughing, wet, exhausted. Then the intercom crackled again overhead. "Patient waiting," the woman whispered calmly. I reached the doorway and slowly pushed the door inward with the flashlight raised. The room beyond looked empty at first. Broken walls, dust-covered floor, moonlight spilling through shattered windows. But then my flashlight moved toward the far corner near the wall and stopped. A hospital bed stood there. Metal frame, white sheets, oxygen tank beside it. None of it should have existed. And sitting upright in the bed was a woman wearing an old patient gown staring toward the doorway. Thin face, hollow eyes, oxygen tube beneath her nose. She looked completely real, not transparent, not decayed, just exhausted beyond human limits. My breathing stopped completely because the room around her no longer matched the abandoned building outside. The walls looked cleaner near the bed. Equipment shadows moved faintly beneath working overhead lights that didn't exist seconds earlier. And somewhere beyond the room I could suddenly hear an active hospital again. Footsteps. Carts rolling. Distant coughing through hallways. The entire building around me had changed. The woman in the bed slowly turned her head toward me. "You finally came," she whispered weakly. My chest tightened painfully because her voice didn't sound threatening, only tired, deeply tired. Then, movement appeared behind her through the room doorway, leading back into the hall. Nurses crossing the corridor outside, orderlies pushing equipment, shadows moving through a hospital that no longer existed. And suddenly I realized the true horror of Waverly Hills. The building never understood the hospital closed. Somewhere inside those endless corridors, routines had continued emotionally long after everyone died or left. Patients still waited for help. Staff still tried to complete rounds. Call lights still needed answering. Then the woman in the bed looked directly into my eyes and quietly asked something that nearly broke me psychologically. "Are you taking over the shift?" The second she said that, every sound in the hospital stopped. Silence swallowed the room instantly. The lights vanished. The bed disappeared. I stumbled backward into the dark, abandoned hallway, gasping hard while the fifth floor returned to normal around me. Broken walls, empty rooms, emergency lights flickering weakly overhead. Then the patient call bell above room 502 shut off softly with one final click. Complete silence followed afterward. I left Waverly Hills before sunrise and resigned less than a week later. Officially, I blamed sleep deprivation and stress from overnight shifts, which honestly wasn't false. But the real reason was simpler. After that night, I started reacting to ordinary sounds like I was still inside the hospital. Elevator chimes, intercom static, call buttons in medical buildings. Even now, years later, if I hear distant coughing in a hallway after midnight, my body immediately expects another patient room nearby. Sometimes the worst part still happens in dreams. I'll wake suddenly thinking my radio just activated beside the bed, and for one horrible second, I genuinely believe I'm still walking rounds inside Waverly Hills, answering calls floor by floor through endless dark corridors. Because the scariest thing about that building was never seeing ghosts. It was realizing part of the hospital never stopped functioning after everyone was gone. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to True Haunting Log so you never miss the next encounter. And if you've ever worked overnight somewhere that felt emotionally wrong after dark, send your story to truehauntinglog@gmail.com. And tell us in the comments, what other ghost topic do you want to hear real stories about next?